Hi, it's Dwyer. It is August 14th, 2022. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. Always 1776.com, a free site. Let's play promoter. Let's pretend that we can actually promote what's going to happen at heavyweight. And let's discuss the fights that are viable financially with an understanding. This is all make-believe, because keep in mind, the business of being an actual promoter takes years of developing relationships, developing trust with boxing managers, with fighters, with venues, with sponsors, with investors, right? So we understand, we're simplifying the process here. But let's just talk about the way the heavyweight division might roll out, based on the actual market value of fights, not necessarily the abilities of the fighters. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, Tyson Fury has announced that he's retiring, right? Yet again. The big question will be whether he continues to train, right? Understand, this is boxing. You've had many fighters, Ray Leonard among them, say, that's it, I'm out of the sport, right? But if Fury continues to train, then he will still be in the running to fight in the biggest fights of the division, whoever the champion is. But if he gains weight, if he stops training, like Prince Nassim Hamed did, right? Even though it looked like Hamed had years ahead of him, then it's over, right? Understand, Fury is well into his 30s, right? If he stops training, it's not like his body's going to bounce back quickly. If he stops training, then there might be a chance that Tyson Fury is no longer Tyson Fury, right? So whatever the announcements fighters make, right? And Lord knows, we've seen our share of fighters who look like they're well out of the sport, think George Foreman, suddenly show back up in the sport, right? Retiring is a tradition in boxing. Some of these great fighters have retired multiple times, right? Don't look at the announcement, look at what the fighter does. If you see an interview with Tyson Fury 6 months from now, and he looks in shape, and if you're hearing that he's continuing to be in the ring with people like Joseph Parker, right, Joe Joyce behind the scenes, if he's still in the ring with other world-class fighters privately, then just understand the option of a return remains. Let me point out too, I mentioned Ray Leonard. Understand, Ray Leonard had an attached retina. This is in the 80s when things like that threatened careers, right? He retired. When he comes back, he faces Marvin Hagler. He faces Roberto Duran in a third fight. In other words, Ray's not coming back through the back door, right? He faces a multi-year middleweight champion, guy who's in the Hall of Fame. He faces Duran, who he was 1-1 against, right? Keep in mind, the Duran of the late 80s still had some pop left, right? He later segues, fights terrible Terry Norris, who's in the Hall of Fame, right? Then it should have been apparent by the Terry Norris fight that Ray was no longer Ray. Ray fought Donnie Lalonde, beat him, the light heavyweight champion. Ray then fought Hector Camacho, right? So we're talking about a second act by Ray Leonard that has some big names, has multiple Hall of Famers, right? And Ray did well for himself. Beats Hagler, beats Duran, loses badly to Terry Norris, beats Donnie Lalonde, loses badly to Hector Camacho, right? Let's understand how retired Ray was by the Hector Camacho fight. He was actually ringside, one of the announcers. And Camacho, who had a lot of flavor, after beating up a guy, right, in the fight Ray was announcing, walks over to the side of the ring and challenges Ray Leonard to a fight. And of course, ego got the best of Ray Leonard. Ray Leonard accepted the challenge. Now, Ray going into the fight, right, earlier, Ray was one of the announcers for Camacho's title fight against, I believe, Bazooka Limon years earlier. And during the telecast, Ray said that he thought Camacho had faster hands than him. Well, let's just say Ray was proven right years later when the two guys met in the ring, right? The Ray Leonard story could easily become the Tyson Fury story. But like Ray Leonard, Tyson Fury is going to have to continue to train. He's going to have to continue to eat right and to get in the gym and to spar with world-class opposition, right? If you go the Ricky Hatton route, if you go the Prince Nassim Hamed route, according to reports, if you go the Kell Brook route, and suddenly you're gaining weight, you're living the good life, you've earned it after all, you've had a full boxing career, then it's over, right? Now let's talk about what happens if Fury stays retired, because understand, he's the wild card, at least one of them, in the room, right? He's the lineal. We can debate it, but understand, he's the guy who fought Deontay Wilder 3 times, right? 3 times, right? Anthony Joshua, by contrast, and history can figure out exactly what happened, is on the verge of becoming the Swen Aki of our time. And I don't say that as a compliment, right? Somehow in this era, Anthony Joshua has not had a single fight against either Tyson Fury, a fellow countryman who beat Klitschko before Joshua beat Klitschko, right? Who is unbeaten. As I make this video, he was unbeaten at the time, right? Somehow Joshua did not fight Tyson Fury, and somehow Joshua did not fight 5-year heavyweight champion Deontay Wilder. Let's be clear too, both Fury and Wilder openly campaigned for fights against Joshua, right? Let's just say Joshua won't be remembered, in my opinion, unless things change radically, like Joe Frazier is remembered. Let's recall Joe Frazier was the heavyweight champ. Ali then gets reinstated in boxing. Ali wanted to fight for the title against Joe, who was his friend, who was lending him money, by the way, to help Ali during financially tough times. And Frazier, who had other responsibilities, right? You're the heavyweight champ, you have to fight mandatories and stuff like that. Frazier made it clear that he was open to the idea of fighting Ali, right? Joshua, he was younger at the time. As he gets older, he'll realize that, look, whatever he had on his plate, and we understand sanctioning bodies are going to say, look, either you honor our mandatory contender or you give us back the belt, right? Riddick Bowe, by the way, threw the belt in the garbage in one of the big moments in recent heavyweight history. Well, understand, Joshua easily could have said, look, Tyson, I want to fight you, but I got this other work I need to do, right? The responsibilities of being champion, as you know, right? We'll make this work, right? Joshua was too young at the time. Let me also point out, too, Teofimo Lopez gave a recent interview where he was talking about the problems that fighters have in accepting big fights. And Teofimo pointed out that when he was offered the fight against Lomachenko, and understand, Teofimo Lopez, huge underdog going into that fight, They made an offer to him toward the lower end of the pay scale, right? There's a minimum, and let's say they weren't far off the minimum. Teofimo, who understood that Lomachenko was the biggest opportunity of his career, took the deal. Then, of course, he went out and he beat the favorite, right? Understand, you have fighters like Vladimir Klitschko who would offer mandatories a little bit more than $1 million to fight him, and many did. Because understand, they were being offered an opportunity to become heavyweight champion of the world. Right now, I understand Joshua Nation's upset every time I talk about the failed negotiations involving Joshua and Deontay Wilder. I need for people to understand that publicly, the Wilder people said they were willing to cross the Atlantic Ocean to make that fight happen. Right? I need for people to look at how dangerously close, and it does hurt his legacy, Joshua is to having been in an era where two of the more meaningful heavyweights, in fact, I would say it's the two heavyweights who defined the era, right? Tyson Fury, again, still unbeaten. Deontay Wilder, who has only lost to one man, and that's Tyson Fury. Right? Just understand how dangerously close Joshua is to not fighting either. Right, folks? It's scary. He's the underdog right now to Alexander Usyk. He's already lost to Usyk. How did Joshua make it to his 30s without fighting either Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder? Understand, when you talk about this era of heavyweights, and Fury, of course, has announced his retirement, I would argue that the Fury-Wilder series is really the top of the food chain, right? That's the series that really defines the era, right? Well, let's just say, and I agree with Teofimo Lopez, right? If you want something and you're offered it, I'm not saying accept bottom dollar, but what I am saying is make it work. When you are a champion and you have an offer to fight a competing champion and the guy is willing to come to your backyard, that should have been worth some market value. I don't understand why you can't say at that point, even if you think most of the fans are coming to see you, right here, you take 50%, I'll take 50%. Let me point out too, and I understand this guy, to paraphrase Ice Cube, is the brother you love to hate. But understand, Floyd Mayweather was unbeaten. Unbeaten. Manny Pacquiao wasn't. Right? Pacquiao had lost to people like Eric Morales, El Terrible. Right? And that was a clinical destruction by El Terrible. Right? Pacquiao had lost. Floyd had not lost. Floyd had fought huge names. Right? When it came time, when they were discussing making the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight, according to reports, Mayweather offered Pacquiao 50%. Right? Think about it. Because Floyd thought he could beat Pacquiao. Floyd understood, too, this was the fight the fans demanded. Floyd wanted to treat Pacquiao with respect. Right? Because these are the fights that make legacy. These are the biggest fights of your career. Now, Floyd did have a request, which was special at the time. He wanted a drug testing clause. Now, Google this. You're going to find out that the request was so controversial that no less than Marvin Hagler, right, one of the gold standards of the sport in my eyes, right, Hall of Famer, came forward and said that Floyd should drop the request. Well, that request sunk the fight. But make no mistake, Floyd was offering Pacquiao around 50%. 50. Well, that fight unfortunately didn't take place for another 5 years. When it finally did take place, Mayweather was proven right. Mayweather won the fight. Right? But understand, that's the way, in my opinion, Joshua Wilder should have been handled. If Anthony Joshua privately feels he would have beaten Deontay Wilder, he needs to realize that he lost millions of dollars not having that fight when he was unbeaten and when Wilder was unbeaten. Understand, situations like that don't happen that often. When they do, and if you realize, hey, my market value is going to skyrocket if I beat this guy, you need to take that fight. Well, let's continue. In the immediate term, the biggest fight that can be had in the heavyweight division, in my opinion, based on box office, and again, this has nothing to do with the abilities of the fighters, right? Let me just point out, young guys, I hear you, right? I believe Filip Ergovic inherits the division, right? I understand the upside of Joseph Parker, at least I think I do, right? I get that Andy Ruiz, if a pocket is allowed to form, has no peers in terms of punch selection and hand speed, right? I get the idea that Big Baby Anderson is just waiting for the opportunity to collapse the pocket on one of these bigger names. I know there are heavyweights out there who believe that their time is now. But many of those heavyweights aren't as well known with the fans. Right? The biggest fight in the near term that can be made after Usyk Joshua is the Usyk Joshua winner versus Deontay Wilder. Right, folks? Understand that would be the link between the Usyk Joshua winner and Tyson Fury. Right? Depending on how that fight plays out, we'll have a better idea on the last 7 years of heavyweight boxing. Right? Understand, if Deontay Wilder dusts off, the winner of Usyk Joshua, that's going to completely immortalize the legacy of Tyson Fury. That's also going to immortalize the legacy of Deontay Wilder while making everyone a lot of money. Understand, if the winner of Usyk Joshua beats Wilder, that opens up a whole new story. Right? If the winner is Anthony Joshua, and I name him first because, of course, he's been in the heavyweight division for several years. Then we have, depending on how the fight unrolls, either a hellacious rematch. Right? Let's solve the Joshua Wilder question once and for all. You also have the possibility of an all-UK validation match. Right? Joshua saying, look, I have had some hard nights. Didn't Carlos Monzon lose some fights? Right? I'm here. I've beaten Usyk. Now I want to take on Tyson. I've beaten Wilder. Now I want to take on Tyson Fury. This is not about the belts. This is about history. This is about legacy. This is about my career. Right? If you're Fury, can you say no to that? Let's talk about longer term. Some of these might surprise you. Right? How those fights fall out. You then get the unification matches. Right? That's where Joseph Parker, Andy Ruiz, Luis Ortiz, Joe Joyce, that's where those guys come in. Right? But I don't believe they enter the room until some things are decided between Usyk, Joshua, Deontay Wilder, and perhaps Tyson Fury. Now, there are wild cards in all of this, in part because of the past. If Usyk beats Joshua, I believe the man who gave a slimmer Usyk the toughest fight of his career looms large. And this is the guy who broke Jay Obataya's jaw in 2 places in narrowly losing his title at cruiserweight. This is a guy who has already beaten heavyweight Manuel Charr by stoppage. And that's Maris Briedis. Understand, Briedis is in his 30s. Should Usyk beat Joshua and not have an opportunity to fight Fury, right? If Deontay Wilder, who's fighting Robert Helenius, decides, no, I'm not going to fight Alexander Usyk, right? Because he has other lucrative matches, right? He could pivot and fight Anthony Joshua, provided Joshua doesn't get destroyed in the Usyk rematch. Right? Understand, Usyk's best move at that point, if he wants instant box office, and I believe this fight has a lot of box office that people aren't thinking about, would be to fight Maris Briedis at heavyweight. Right, folks? Briedis is a blessed puncher. You can tell that just from the broken jaws Obataya faced. You could tell that just looking at the 12th round of the Obataya fight, where the young guy was hanging on. Right? I believe Usyk Briedis 2 would be huge box office. Let's talk about another fighter. And let me point out, this is one of the 2 huge opportunities of the year in terms of casino mistakes. I need for people to look hard at Zhang Zhili, right? Look hard at him. He fights Ergovic, again, who I consider the heir apparent, right? And I've spent some time looking at some film of some heavyweights. But there is no reason why on God's green earth Zhili is a plus 700 in that fight. Zhili is one of the hardest punchers in the division, and he's a southpaw, right? An amateur pedigree that had him winning an Olympic medal. Just understand, he is, for the boxing historian crowd, the Max Schmeling of our time, right? If he beats Ergovic, I need for people to consider the possibility of a Chinese national becoming world heavyweight champion. Right, folks? I want you to really look hard at it. Right? Your President Xi, the opportunity to host a Chinese national fighting the winner of Usyk Joshua is huge. The money it would generate would be huge. Right? This would be one of those rare opportunities. And keep in mind, just food for thought, I believe Zhang hits much harder than Alexander Usyk. Right? Joshua has already been knocked down in at least 2 fights. Rumor has it he was knocked down in private sparring by people like David Price. Who knows if that's true? Right? So understand, if Zhili beats Ergovic and becomes a mandatory, folks, that's going to be a huge moment for promoters. Behind the scenes, you and I know that Zhili spends a lot of time in the United States, right? That's not the way it would play out in terms of the politics of the match. Understand, behind the scenes, Max Schmeling was very good friends with Joe Louis. Didn't agree with Hitler on anything, right? But understand, Max Schmeling at the time was viewed as a symbol for Germany, right? Now, I'm not equating Nazi Germany with present-day China, right? The Chinese, at the end of the day, are hardcore capitalists, right? They've embraced Elon Musk. Understand, if you're an investor, you know all about Alibaba, Baidu, and several major hitting capitalist Chinese companies, right? Let's just say that if Zhang Zhili beats Ergovic, that's going to shake things up. He's a wild card in all of this, like Maris Briedis. You're talking about the entry of new venues. You're talking about new money in boxing, right? As it is right now. Saudi Arabia is making its presence felt. This Usyk Joshua fight's going to happen in Saudi Arabia. Just understand, if Zhang Zhili becomes the mandatory contender at heavyweight, that opens up the possibility of heavyweight bouts in places like Beijing, right? So just understand, life's unfair. I'm not saying the heavyweight division is the most talented division in boxing. What I am saying is, from a box office and from a geopolitical viewpoint, the heavyweight division right now is in the catbird seat. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.